The chime of the station bell has a way of slicing through the thickest sleep, the deepest thought. It's not just a sound. It's a physical jolt, a command that bypasses the brain and goes straight to the muscles. For 10 years, that bell had been the metronome of my life. My world was one of routines punctuated by chaos. Wake, train, clean the rig, check the gear, eat, wait. And then the explosion of action. It was a life of tangible things. The heft of an axe, the hiss of an oxygen tank, the searing heat of a backdraft, the rough texture of a brick wall against my gloves. I dealt in absolutes. A fire is either out or it isn't. A person is either safe or they're not. There was a clean, brutal honesty to it that I couldn't find anywhere else. It was a language I understood. My other life, the one outside the station, was a muddle of ambiguities. It was a world of unspoken expectations and polite fictions, mostly revolving around my family. My sister, Elena, was a success. That was the official, undisputed narrative. She was a corporate strategist, a job so abstract I couldn't even properly explain it. She lived in a high-rise apartment in a city 3 states away, wore clothes that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and spoke a language of mergers, acquisitions, and leveraging assets. My mother, a woman who measured the world in practicalities, was utterly mesmerized by her. Elena's success was quantifiable. It had stock options and performance bonuses. My success was measured in moments that were terrifying and fleeting. A child pulled from a smoke-filled room. A family cat revived on a lawn. These weren't things you could frame and hang on a wall. They were ghosts, memories that lingered in the quiet moments, smelling faintly of smoke. I knew my mother was proud of me in a vague, isn't that nice sort of way. But it was the pride you have for a well-meaning but slightly eccentric relative. My job was a noble calling, a community service. Elena's was a career. My life was a series of save days. Hers was a carefully constructed future. There was a weariness in me that had nothing to do with fighting fires. It was the exhaustion of constantly feeling like I was speaking a foreign language to the people who were supposed to know me best. The day it happened was my mother's 65th birthday. The call came in just after 2 p.m. as I was polishing the chrome on engine 12. A residential fire, single-family home, possible entrapment. It was a standard call, the kind that sets your heart to a low, steady drumbeat of readiness. I pulled on my gear, my mind already running through the checklist. Then the address came over the radio. Elm Street, number 432. My heart didn't drum. It stopped. A block of ice formed in my stomach. For 32 Elm Street. It was the address I'd written on every school form. The place I knew better than any other on earth. It was my mother's house. My house. The world narrowed to a single, roaring point of focus. The ride there was a blur of sirens and shouting that I couldn't hear. All I could see was the layout of the house in my mind. The creaky third step on the stairs, the loose floorboard in the hallway, the window in my old bedroom that always stuck. These weren't just architectural details. They were potential traps, death sentences. When we rounded the corner, the sight stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't just smoke. It was thick, black, angry smoke, billowing from the back of the house, from the kitchen. My mother's kitchen. My crew looked at me, their faces grim. They knew. "Captain," I said, my voice tight and unfamiliar. "I'm first in." There was no argument. They knew this was different. This wasn't a job. It was a reckoning. The heat hit me like a physical blow the moment I kicked in the back door. The smoke was a living thing, a predator that choked and blinded. My training took over, a cold, hard shell around the screaming terror in my core. Keep low. Follow the wall. Sweep the floor. But my mind was screaming her name. Mom, Mom, Mom. The kitchen was a maelstrom of orange and black. A grease fire on the stove, it looked like. It had climbed the cabinets and was eating its way through the ceiling. I hit it with the extinguisher, a futile gesture against the rage of the blaze, but it bought me a few feet. I pushed deeper into the house, into the dining room. The smoke was thinner here, but the heat was intensifying. I was shouting her name, my voice muffled and distorted by the respirator. No answer. The fear was a cold, sharp thing in my chest. I swept through the downstairs, my light cutting uselessly through the gloom. Nothing. That left the upstairs. The staircase was a chimney of superheated gas. I took a breath, centered myself, and started to climb, each creaky step a ghost from my childhood. The smoke alarm was shrieking now, a pathetic, belated warning. In the upstairs hallway, I found him. Patches, her ridiculous, fat orange cat, huddled under a small table, wheezing. I scooped him up, tucked him inside my coat, and continued the search. Her bedroom door was closed. I put my glove to it. Hot, dangerously hot. I braced myself, kicked it open, and was met with a wall of smoke. I crawled inside, sweeping the floor with my hands. My glove brushed against fabric. A foot. I followed it up. It was her. She was unconscious on the floor, not far from the window. Adrenaline surged through me, a white-hot wave of pure, unadulterated purpose. I ripped off my mask and forced it over her face, giving her the last of my good air. I didn't think. I just acted. I hoisted her into a fireman's carry, her dead weight a terrifying and precious burden. Patches was squirming in my coat. The journey back down felt like an eternity. The fire was roaring now, angry that I was stealing its prize. I burst out the front door into the clean, cool air, into a world of flashing lights and concerned faces. I laid her gently on the lawn as the paramedics rushed forward. I stood up, my lungs burning, my body screaming with exertion, and watched as they put an oxygen mask on her face. She was breathing. She was alive. I turned back to the house, my house, and saw the flames break through the roof. I had saved her, but I had lost everything else. The days that followed were a blur of logistics and exhaustion. My mother was fine, discharged from the hospital with a mild case of smoke inhalation and a scolding from the doctor. The house, however, was a wreck. The back half was a charred skeleton, the rest ruined by smoke and water. I spent my off-duty hours there, pulling on work gloves instead of fire gear, sifting through the wreckage. It was a gut-wrenching archaeology of my own life. A melted vinyl record I'd loved in high school. A stack of photo albums, their edges curled and blackened but the faces within still smiling. The scorched door frame in the kitchen where my father had marked my height each year until he passed. Each salvaged item felt like a tiny victory against the inferno. I was a firefighter again, but this time I wasn't just putting out a blaze. I was trying to piece a life back together. Elena flew in 2 days later. She arrived not in a flurry of emotion, but with the quiet, terrifying efficiency of a corporate takeover. She had a checklist and a timeline. She dealt with the insurance adjusters with a ruthless precision that left them stammering. She hired a disaster restoration company before I'd even managed to get a tarp over the hole in the roof. While I was pulling soot-covered memories from the debris, she was on conference calls, her voice a calm, authoritative hum. We moved like two planets in different orbits, occasionally crossing paths in the wreckage of our shared history. The adjuster is trying to lowball us on the structural damage, she'd say, tapping at her tablet. I've cross-referenced 3 other claims in this area. We can push for another 20%. I just nod, holding a half-burnt baseball trophy in my hands. We were both trying to fix the same problem, but we were speaking completely different languages. Mine was the language of sentiment, of memory. Hers was the language of market value and depreciation. My mother, staying temporarily at my aunt's house, seemed to shrink with every passing day. The fire had taken more than her home. It had taken her certainty. She was adrift, and she clung to Elena like a life raft. It was Elena who sorted her prescriptions, Elena who handled the bank, Elena who promised to build everything back better than before. I was the one who was there every day, covered in grime and sweat, but I felt increasingly invisible. I had run into the fire, but Elena was the one who seemed to be saving her now. The decision to go ahead with her birthday party was my aunt's. We have to celebrate what we still have, she'd insisted. So we gathered in my aunt's sterile, unfamiliar living room. A small, sad collection of relatives stood around making awkward small talk. The smell of cake couldn't quite cover the faint scent of smoke that still clung to my clothes, to my hair, to my mother's sweater. I felt like a ghost at the feast. People patted me on the back. That was a brave thing you did, Mark. We're all so proud. But the words felt hollow, like lines from a script. They were praising the uniform, the idea of a firefighter. They hadn't seen the terror in my eyes or the raw, primal fear that drove me up that staircase. I was standing by the fireplace, nursing a beer, when I overheard it. It was my mother talking to our cousin, Sarah. Sarah had just been gushing about my heroism. My mother smiled, a tired, watery smile. Yes, we were so lucky Mark was there. So lucky. There was a pause. Then she put her hand on Sarah's arm, her voice dropping to a confidential, almost proud tone. But Elena, she said, her eyes finding my sister across the room, who was elegantly explaining some complex insurance clause on her phone. She's the real success. She's handling everything. The money, the contractors. She's building our future back. That's what matters. The words hit me with the force of a physical impact. It wasn't the heat of the fire that burned. It was the ice-cold precision of that statement. The real success. Even now. Even after I had walked through flames for her, carried her out of a dying house, it was still Elena's world of spreadsheets and phone calls that defined success. The thing I had done, the most important, defining act of my life, was reduced to a footnote of luck. The air in the room became thick and unbreathable. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, even though no one was looking. I set my bottle down, turned, and walked out the back door into the biting cold of the night. The crisp air did little to cool the rage and humiliation burning in my chest. I stood on the patio, staring at the manicured lawn, my hands clenched into fists. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch something. I wanted to disappear. I had faced down death, and it felt less painful than this. A quiet cough broke the silence. I turned to see Mr. Henderson from next door to my mom, an old widower who had lived on that street for 50 years. He was holding a steaming mug. He'd been the one to call 911. Figured you could use this, he said, his voice raspy with age. He handed me the mug. Hot chocolate. I took it, my hands trembling slightly. We stood in silence for a moment, the steam from the mug rising like a phantom between us. Heard what your mother said, he stated, not unkindly. People say foolish things when they're scared. I just grunted, unable to form words. You know, he continued, looking up at the stars. I was watching from my window that day, when your engine pulled up. I saw you jump out, and for a second you weren't a firefighter. I looked at him, confused. I saw your face, he said, turning his pale blue eyes to me. Before you put the mask on. It was the face of a terrified boy who was about to lose his whole world. It wasn't the face of a hero doing a job. It was the face of a son. His words cut through the anger, finding something deeper, something I hadn't even acknowledged in myself. He was right. In that moment, I wasn't Captain Mark Connolly of Engine 12. I was just Mark, the kid who was afraid of the dark, trying to save his mom. Mr. Henderson took a slow sip from his own mug. My boy, David, he's a stockbroker. Makes a fortune. Every time he visits, he talks about the market, about his portfolio. He's a good boy. But one year I got pneumonia. Real bad. He flew home, sat by my bed for 3 days straight, just holding my hand. Didn't talk about stocks once. He looked at me again, a deep, knowing sadness in his eyes. He never talks about that trip. He only talks about the market. It's easier, you see. Talking about the things that don't scare you to death. A profound sense of clarity washed over me. So sudden and complete it almost made me dizzy. It wasn't that my mother didn't value what I did. It was that she couldn't bear to think about it. My world, the world of fire and risk and loss, was her deepest terror made real. She couldn't embrace it, so she minimized it. Elena's world of numbers and contracts was safe. It was a language of control, of predictability. By praising Elena's success, she wasn't diminishing me. She was clinging to a reality that didn't involve watching her son walk into a burning building. It was her armor against a fear too profound to name. My anger dissolved, replaced by a wave of empathy so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. My fight wasn't about being acknowledged as a hero. It was about understanding her fear. I looked at Mr. Henderson, at this near stranger who had seen me more clearly than my own family. Thank you, I said, the words feeling inadequate. He just nodded, a small, sad smile on his face. I knew what I had to do. I finished the hot chocolate, the warmth spreading through my chest, and walked back inside. I didn't go back to the party. I went straight to my mother. She was sitting alone in a corner, looking small and overwhelmed. Elena was gone, probably on another important call. The other guests were giving her a wide berth, as if her grief were contagious. I pulled up a chair and sat beside her, not saying a word. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out one of the photo albums I'd salvaged. The cover was warped and stained with soot. I opened it to a random page. It was a picture of me about 7 years old at Halloween. I was wearing a ridiculous plastic firefighter helmet and holding a toy axe, beaming at the camera. My dad was kneeling beside me, his arm around my shoulder. I simply placed the open album on her lap. She looked down. Her breath hitched. She traced the outline of my smiling, 7-year-old face with a trembling finger. She didn't look at the costume. She looked at my eyes. Then she looked at my father's face, a man she had loved and lost. The house wasn't just a building. It was the container for all those memories, for that life. The fire hadn't just threatened her. It had threatened to erase him all over again. Her shoulders began to shake, and quiet, racking sobs escaped her. I put my arm around her, and she leaned into me, clutching the photo album to her chest like a shield. There were no words, no apologies, no grand declarations. There was only the shared, silent understanding of what had been at stake. It wasn't about the house. It wasn't about success. It was about loss and fear and the desperate, primal need to protect the ones you love. In that quiet corner, amidst the clinking glasses and forced laughter of a party that no one wanted to be at, my mother and I were finally speaking the same language. Weeks turned into months. The house was rebuilt. New walls went up, smelling of fresh paint and sawdust. New floors were laid down, smooth and unblemished. It was different, but it was still home. I found myself at peace in a way I hadn't been before. I went back to the station, to the familiar rhythm of the bells and the easy camaraderie of my crew. But something inside me had shifted. The gnawing need for a certain kind of approval had vanished. My worth wasn't something that could be debated or compared. It was forged in action, in the quiet knowledge of what I was willing to walk through for someone else. Mr. Henderson had given me a gift greater than any medal. He had given me back to myself. The day my mother finally moved back in, I was there to help. We spent the afternoon hanging pictures on the clean, new walls. We came to the last one. It was a new photo, taken at my aunt's house after the party had died down. It was of me, my mom, and Elena. We were all squeezed together on the couch. No one was on the phone. We were all smiling, and for the first time in a long time it looked real. As I hammered the nail into the wall, my mother came and stood beside me. She didn't look at the picture. She looked at me. She reached out and placed her hand on my arm, her touch light but firm. "I'm glad you're here, Mark," she said, her voice quiet. It wasn't, "You're a success," or "You're a hero." It was something simpler and infinitely more profound. It was everything. I hung the picture and we stood back to look at it, a new memory placed carefully on the foundation of the old. I no longer needed the world to call me a hero, because for the first time, I finally understood what it meant to be a son.